Okay, got it.
It snowed in Bakewell. John says it's cold and damp,
Mm.
hence the hat and the gloves. John, do you keep your flat cold?
Yes, I do, but it's not very warm. I don't know why I don't turn up the heating. It's just my sort of silly nature loves to suffer. I
It's
think it's
probably from your farmer's days.
I think it's good for me to be cold. Uh,
Oh, funny. But you
yes,
have a very warm heart.
hopefully, that's to make
Yeah.
the business, isn't it?
Um, okay, we're talking about chapter 31 of John's book. I was just glancing over it again, and you start out right away with spiritual highs are often met with corresponding lows.
Yeah.
And I can deeply connect to what you write. One comes to realize are always associated with ego me, typically are unwelcomed events, upsetting moods, and many varied thorns in the flesh.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about those highs and lows and how to cope with them?
And I had a visitor with me yesterday, uh, not so young, sort of young, middle-aged man from London. And like most people these days, he picked up the fashionable idea of doing things with the ego, either getting less of it or try to sort it out or something, sort out his good and bad moods. Well, he asked me what I did. Well, I had to think, really. So I've never really been into that sort of psychological approach to myself or anybody else, really. And I said, I don't do anything. I said, and he said, well, what can I do? I think the best thing you can do is just not worry about it. Um, well, the more you worry about these things, the bigger they get, don't they? And I mean, you're not going to get rid of the ego. I don't think anybody's ever done that since the beginning of time, probably. So why not just accept it? It's just part of your machinery as a man, and heed the good old advice. Try not to be us. Try not to be selfish. Be unselfish, and basically just attend. Well, of course, the real answer is just to get on with life. In other words, attend to what's there to attend to, and forget about your ego. Um, if you love something, if you're lucky enough to love your work as I did, love my farm, I just tended to that. And by doing that, you forget about the ego. If you sit there just worrying about it and trying to sort it out, you'll just tie yourself up in ever more knots, in my experience. I'm sure there's lots of clever people who think they do know how to make a better job of it, but I'm not convinced. Um, After all, like your tummy, I'm rather fond of saying these days that the mind plus ego are really like just a higher form digestive system. The tummy digests the physical food, and the mind digests, the sort of media food and the thoughts and things. It's all functioning perfectly well. You don't really have to worry about it. But if you attend to whatever's literally in front of you, like tonight when everything's covered with ice, frozen sort of half melted ice, half melted snow. Well, if you walk attentively, then you won't fall over, will you? And as a byproduct, you won't worry about the ego. You make mountains out of molehills and worry about things you can't really do much about. You're more interested in whatever it is that isn't you, even if it's just the dog. We're not all too keen on other people, but if you are, that helps to forget about yourself, doesn't it? You've got someone to love or something to love, and you normally forget about yourself in the process. what can I do about my highs and lows? Well, what can I do about the highs and lows out there up the other side of the window, the weather? I can't do anything about them. Can you? Who can? Who could level out their ups and downs? You're happy one day and sad the next, aren't we? Is anybody not like that? So's the weather. Especially if you live in a place like England, it's changing all the time.
Or Montana.
Or Montana, winter, summer, day and night. So with our moods. Extraordinary how we're trying to improve things, aren't we? Improve what's natural. We try to stop and pretend we're not going to die, for example. That's a pretty silly one, isn't it?
John, it stuck out to me. You write a measured, moderate lifestyle helps keep mind and body under control. How would you define a measured, moderate lifestyle?
Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. That was a good old saying, wasn't it? My dad used to like to quote those words of St. Paul. Moderation in all things, my boy, he'd say to me. He was a man of moderation. He liked wine, but he'd just drink one glass. No more. Moderation in all things. Not one chocolate at a time, maybe. Not too much food, but enough. Moderation. Common sense. Natural measure. Again, I don't like to keep on about this, but I can't help regretting that we've got so separated from nature and the natural rhythms of nature. We live in such a man-made world of either hyperactivity or with its counterpart of slump. I do love nature. A daily walk, I think, is as good as absolutely essential to get out of my little flat where I live and walk on grass and look at sheep and cattle and horses every day, and I feel sort of brought back to normality. And there's a lovely river flowing past Bakewell. I just love to stand on the grassy bank and look at that, watch how it rises and falls with the rainfall. I've been watching that river for most of my life. Old friend, I never get bored with it. Wonderful thing to stand on a bridge and see the water flowing underneath you and think about life, flowing down the river of time. I love to watch the way the last week or two, wind and frost has taken off the last of summer's leaves. Trees around naked and bare for the next 6 months. I love all this. The way the grass is losing its shine. I find these things of great comfort. The most marvellous, we had a few days of very hard frost and marvellous clear sky. I go up to the church very early every morning. It's still dark, and I lean back over a convenient sort of support then to spend a few minutes soaking in the moonlight and the stars. I just love that. I really love that. Love it, love it, love it. I feel I belong up there. It's my home, really. Just love it. Oh, dear stars. I've been watching them all my life. I never get tired of them. I think that's wonderful. If you've got stars in your life like that, then you've always got something a bit bigger than the highs and lows of this lower life. You know, what happens to the ego? You just forget about it, my dears. It's no big deal when you get up into the big things. It's too small. We need to stretch ourselves. Yes, I love to get outside the world of man. I can sort of spend some time with people, but I think it's well nigh essential to get away from the human environment, from at least some part of every day. Remind yourself that man's not so big as you think he is. Some people tend to think he is.
Yeah, we're not a very humble species, are we?
Well, this is one of our great problems, isn't it? And why at least some acquaintance with nature usually helps to bring in at least something that isn't me, something bigger than me. And then we realize that we're actually filled with something a million times more important than me. It's not that man is lessened in the process. He's actually uplifted and dignified, ennobled. That's a good word, nobility, which isn't much used these days, but I'm all for it. When you look up at the stars and melt into them, just forget all about the latest astronomical knowledge, just love them. Look up at them and you find yourself, you feel ennobled, lifted up to a nobler dimension of life, expanded. And that's what I mean when I say don't worry about the ego. You just want to just turn away from it, my dears, and give your interest or try to get interested in an alternative, and you'll find it just settles back into its sort of minor, bothersome sort of role in life, and will cease to trouble you. You'll just grow out of it. It's just a phase when people get obsessed with their egos. The world's nuts and gone nuts about psychology these days. You know, when I was a little boy, I don't think psychology's been invented. People have lived thousands of years without ever thinking about psychology. I mean, the early pioneers of psychology, like Freud and that, they only lived, well, not much more than 100 years ago. It's terribly new, all this stuff. And, you know, our ancestors lived, they just leant over a gate sometimes with a neighbour and talked about their women or their, their tummy ache or something. Share their troubles, went their way. It's we really haven't. We've lost touch with a lot of sort of simple common sense. And we've become so unnatural, haven't we? We've lost our. Most of us, about all we get of nature is a dog. Well, God bless them, a dog's better than nothing. But there's some bigger stuff out there as well, just waiting for us to go and spend some time with it. It's funny, you comment about my wearing this funny hat and my gloves. I say I don't like to be too warm, but I don't, honestly don't. I can't bear going into overheated places where in the middle of winter, women are walking around in their T-shirts, for heaven's sake. Well, okay, if they want to do that, it seems to be more sensible just to put on more clothes when the weather gets cold. Why waste money on central heating? Wear a T-shirt in summer, for heaven's sake. And I can't tell you how many layers have I got on. I think I've got 4, 5. I've got 6 layers of clothes on. I'm nice. I'm all right. my T-shirt's in the drawer to wait till the spring.
We're so spoiled, John. We're in America, we like to say we're a bunch of sissies.
Oh dear. Funny, aren't we?
You in this chapter you write about as a young man of 20. I wonder what the world was like before man messed it up. So I went on a long sea voyage to find out. And I know your voyage went to Australia, and you write, I saw the effect of man's invasion on land and native people, and realized how easily a natural lifestyle and the sensitive balances of nature are destroyed. And then you ask the question, what can I do? And I know a lot of us ask that same question.
Well, indeed, what can I do? Well, as a young man, of course, I was trying to do it physically. I was one of the first organic farmers and went out to South America to make the world a better place. Did what I could to reforest the Andes. Well, made a start at it. It didn't get on very far, but I tried. And now I pray. I pray, my dears. I lead a life of prayer. And what do I mean by that? It's, you see, with these arms, I was quite strong. I could do all sorts of things as a young man. But and I had quite a good mind. I could write and wrote articles and used to do public speaking and that. And then I gradually realized that there's a much greater power, a sort of power behind the scenes, as it were, a higher authority. I recognize that, I said this the other day, I'm sorry to repeat it, but I will. As a little boy, my father would say to me, "Mother knows best." And as a farmer, I learnt the great lesson that nature knows best, better than me anyway. And then I began to figure out that God knows best of all. What is God? Well, God's super nature. It's beyond the visible nature that we can see. It's the unseen, unheard, but nevertheless power that brings it all into being. And prayer is aligning oneself with that. As Jesus said, "Into thy hands, O Lord." That's what I do. Whatever I cannot do, which is virtually everything, God can. So I try to surrender not only myself, but everything that is contained within my consciousness to Almighty and most merciful God. And in that I find complete satisfaction, and that there's no better way in which I can serve the world I love. And this is what I've been doing for the last 25 years of my life. This is what I call my work. Does it make any difference? God knows, and I do not. But I have faith that it's the best thing I can do.
You write about a terrorist bombing in London and, stuff like violence, war, always going on in the world, and what calls it terrorist but me. And I thought maybe you could touch on the labeling, the judgment, the fear, and personal reaction that arises from separation, as you write, where everything is assessed by how it affects me and other me's beyond this one one. Because we get so stuck in judgment and fear and me versus them.
Well, this is one of the one of the most damaging aspects of the ego. In other words, me, which judges and criticizes others. Hence, we are told, Jesus very clearly tells us, judge not. Because if we judge others, as he says, judge not, how does he go? Judge not, lest ye, that's not so ye be not judged, or something like that. Anyway, because the effect of judging others is to put ourselves in prison. You see, you judge others, you lock yourselves into a position, don't you? Here, me, I'm right, and he's wrong. Now, if you just don't judge, in other words, let God be the judge, because you don't really know. I don't. You don't either. You think you do. You think you know. You sit down and quite sure. Why does that man do it? You know, there's 2 or 3 wars going on in the world now. Each side thinks they're right, don't they? If you think one side's right, it's like a football match. You support one side, don't you? And cheer when your side wins a goal. But the other side doing the same thing, and their side gets a goal. Well, sometimes it erupts into war, but usually you just end up still remain friends afterwards. The world isn't so different, is it? Really? So it is very sound policy. This is one way in which you can moderate the power of the ego. You see, just be a bit less ready to condemn others. And that this is age-old folklore, isn't it? Everybody's known this throughout history. Better not to judge. You know, look to your own sins, look to your own faults before you've been too ready to condemn others. So go around labeling other people as this or that is it's not always very helpful.
What do you think in us is this addiction to judgment, or I'm right, they're wrong? It seems like it's so deeply ingrained in our being.
Well, do the animals do it? Well, do they? You know as well as I do. Not everybody knows it, but you and I know it. We're both used to animals. They don't condemn, do they? Even if someone grabs the meat before they do, they usually step aside and wait their turn or something. You see, what the ego does, the ego is really it builds up this substitute identity, this idea that I am separate. The man's first sin, if you go back to the Bible story, see, in the beginning, man lived in paradise. Remember, there was only one man, Adam, one man. presumably a spiritual man. And what happened? He and his wife stole, didn't they? They stole what was they'd been told not to steal. They stole, rather like we're stealing from the world today, stealing what was not within their, what was in their natural provision. And so they got cast out from paradise and divided, first of all from God and then from one another. So one became two, and two has become God knows how many billion people in the world today, all separate, all thinking themselves me, most of them thinking they're right. Well, there we are, dear. Another of the great commandments is do not steal. But if you practice meditation or prayer, then with a bit of luck, you'll become less separate, and you may even rediscover what it is to be one, not divided at all. Come back to that primal state of being in paradise, undivided, not even divided from this unseen, unknown vision we call God. Quite possible. In fact, this is what we're called to do. Although I speak rather lightly about the ego to begin with, which I don't retract because really we become too obsessed about it. But if we put first things first, i.e., our daily practice of turning to God, my regular good practice of meditation and prayer, this will lead the way, as it were, and the ego will fall behind of less and less. We'll simply grow out of it, like a little boy might grow out of his childish selfishness. Most of us, to some extent, as we get older, we're not quite so black and white in our condemnation of others, are we? It's a very nice old saying, as you get older, you don't see the world in black and white, but in different shades of grey. I like that. That's, in my experience, very true.
John, on page 287, do you mind reading that second paragraph? Starts with life becomes.
Life becomes an almost constant longing for God. All else is secondary and shadow. I cannot command it, but restless without can only wait his grace. There's no more expectation of comfort or reliability in man, nor desire for the things of creation. But now the world seems like a fallout, a deposit or consequence, a marvelous order of things, including the disorder of man. But I feel ever less moved to participate. From here, it's a dying echo or a half-remembered dream. Well, that's true enough. Again, I must remind you that I wrote this. God, I didn't put a date on it. It must have been 30 years ago. I suppose I write it because it was at that time, it was a fairly new realization, a fairly new expression. And what's happened since then? I think, like the old saying is, practice what you preach. I think this is what's happened to me and since. It's been putting it into practice. These were my early realizations when it first dawned on me that this is how it is. And I think ever since, this is just what has happened to life. That instead of talking about it, it's become ever more my reality now. I don't think I experience this longing for God now in the same way, because I've only got to be present and feel this stillness, what I call the presence. I spend a lot of time just sitting in presence, and throughout the day, almost always when I'm confronted by people, where I'm required to make some response or do something, I always seem to automatically come back to presence. And so sort of reaching out my hand to hold this invisible hand that's always with me. So this constant longing for God has become the reality now. It's not so much a longing as I'd never say I found God, because I think this is an assumption that you say you found beauty, and you found perfect love. We get glimpses of it sometimes. We think we're pretty near, or even have got an armful of it, but it's infinite, isn't it? How can we ever hold or find the infinite? I think this is very much, you see, an ego concept. This is a result of our separation. When you come into the real world, you see, you don't lose it, so you can't find it. It's just part of you. You merge into it. God's no longer something separate that you find or you long for. It's just this immediate accessibility. Yes, that puts it all right. This instant and immediate accessibility. Lo, I'm with you always. This is how it is. And then in anything you see that doesn't acknowledge that tries to live without it, you recognize as not it. This is the world, the shadow world. It isn't as real as we think it is. And then that just tends to die out of itself. And that's what we see when the ego just pretty much dies out of itself. Loses its validity, you see. Which is 1,000,000 times more effective than trying to get a psychologist or something, shuffle the cards around and come up with a better solution. At least in my experience. It's marvelous how just to be still, which usually involves stop talking, just to find this ever-present stillness. This chap I was telling you about yesterday was worried about his ego. He'd written out a whole lot of bits of paper with questions, you see, to ask me. Well, we started off with these questions and I did my best with them. And then after a while, he looked at me and smiled and he said, I haven't got any more questions. I said, well, what about bits of paper? And he realized, because he'd come to presence, you see. There were no more questions, and there aren't, you see. When you find this infinite presence, there are no more questions, are there? No more problems, no more questions. It's extraordinary. Just a this whole world of trying to find out and trying to get things. You just laugh at it. It all just sort of shrivels away to irrelevance. You're complete. You find this marvelous completion. Yes. Wonderful, really. Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Wonderful, dear. Do you know what it is? I've always been a bit shy of using this word, but I'm losing my shyness about it now. See, my own little love sort of gets bigger like that, you know. You know, that I love you, what I, John, want, my longing for God, you know, longing for a woman or longing for whatever it is, sort of gets somehow. I begin to think now, well, it must be the love of God. This is what we mean by the love of God. And it's totally, totally all-containing. Everything, my dear. Even the terrorists. There's nothing but that isn't loved in this world. And it's the merest worm or maggot or whatever, blowfly. It's in that love all darkness dissolved away. It's all perfect, perfect as the day it was made. And I think you're not far from paradise. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. So what was all the fuss about? All the fuss and bother. Was it ever as real as it seemed? Where's it gone? Was it just water under the bridge of time? Like my boyhood tempers and the world is black and white. What the ego does, because it's separate itself, it makes everything else separate. So we end up living in a world of what you call limits, of names, different names and forms. The moment you call something a name, you separate it from something that has another name. But this chapter, I call it Of Life Unlimited, which means really, imagine you had a lot of wax soldiers, like soldiers, little boy. I used to play with my soldiers as a little boy. They were made of lead. I wouldn't use lead now. Lead's become poisonous, isn't it? But when I was a boy, children's toy soldiers were made of lead. But if you put them in a hot dish, the lead all melts, doesn't it? And they all just become one piece of lead. Or if they're made of wax or something, wax would do the same thing, wouldn't it? And this is really what helps. When you draw nearer the sun, all these separate waxen images we call separate, you and me and different people and different this and that and the goods and bads of life, they all just melt, my dears. They melt before the glory of God, and they just melt into just one. It's not that you lose anything. What you discover is their essence, their pure being before they get pulled down and identified as this or that. Look at me, dear. I'm at the stage now where I can hardly even remember yesterday. So 86 years of my life. I remember what things years and years ago, but I can't remember yesterday. So my life is really already forgotten. It's just water under the bridge. Where's it gone, for heaven's sake? What was John Butler? Can you imagine when I was a child, little baby, being pushed along by my mother, then at school, and then a soldier in the army, and then a farmer? All these things are just, where are they? And where's your past life? Where's it gone? Where is it? And everybody else's, and all those graves in the churchyard, and the millions of people that walk this earth, where are they all? Or have they all just melted back into their original being before they got crystallized and precipitated down into what we call this life of separation, of name and form? And all the animals and all the trees that have ever grown, the dinosaurs and all these things at different ages of the world that scientists tell us about. Where are they all? Was it all a dream? It was real enough, but we're living it, isn't it? God knows, of course it was. Totally real. Of life unlimited. One can hardly imagine it, can you? And yet I assure you that when you reach old age, it really begins to make sense. It makes more sense, really, than life limited. As you grow out of your limits, as you grow, just like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. The cocoon is the limit, isn't it? And the butterfly emerges out of it, spreads its wings. That also has a limit, but a bigger limit. Ultimately, there's no limit at all. Extraordinary, looking back, how your point of view can change. In my mind, just does wander these days, doesn't it? You ask me a question, I wobble around all over the place.
Your mind comes across very clear and with a strong and important message. That's what I hear, John.
Thank you.
I think there's so much confusion and so much information, and there's so many spiritual books and self-help books and psychological books. And one of the things I deeply appreciate about your message and what you have to say, it's always back to doing the work, as you would say.
Again, this is what we call a visitor week. I've got a few visitors that come with me. But I feel I'm ever less inclined these days to enter into conversation. I like just to talk enough to somebody just to know where they're coming from, a bit about their life. But I really feel my best service is, I suppose, to demonstrate my confidence in silence and in not speaking. I suppose that's it. It's not so much just not speaking as demonstrating its validity, that there is almost one can say a higher reality, an unlimited reality in silence, which is limited when it gets brought down into words, especially when there's 99% of conversation is about me, isn't it? You and me. Well, you see, now nature is always demonstrating to us that it doesn't have to be like that. It's extraordinary how many people will go for a walk with a friend, chattering away, and all the trees and the streams and the animals round about are not doing that. The man sort of lives in this little bubble of his own reality, talking to his friend. Why don't the animals find it necessary to babble on and talking? maybe they do, but at least they don't make such a noise about it, do they? And maybe I think that's probably the best way I can help people is sort of show my disinterest in that sort of talking, and that I don't esteem it of value. There's far greater value just to meditate or to walk attentively, to see what's in front of our noses, and with less talking. Yes, I really do feel that these days. The less I open my mouth, the better. I don't really feel that satisfied after being interviewed like that, really. I rather wish I hadn't said most of what I've said. Can't remember what it was anyway. So it wasn't too silly.
Well, we appreciate that you're talking and sharing and writing your books, but being around you and having had the privilege to spend time with you, I mean, John, you definitely practice what you, I don't want to use the word preach, but I'm going to use the word preach. You practice what you preach, and I think that's rare in today's world. So thank you for that.
Well, it is really, yes. I'm not sure if I practice it. Yeah, I think it's. I don't know if I do anything very much, really. I think it's just happened, really. I did ask someone who'd been to see me a few times why she came. And she thought a bit and said, nothing. What she came for? She said nothing. And so I picked that up, and I rather like being called Mr. Nothing. I think it's a marvelous title, really. I really take it seriously because I really do believe that the less of me, the more of God, you see. And instead of being an instrument of God, rather one gets out of the way, one becomes less of an instrument. God doesn't want an instrument, for heaven's sake. God can raise up. It becomes ludicrous to think the arrogance with which we think God needs an instrument, let alone one called John Butler. So, so the less of me, truly, really and truly, I do. I think the less of me, the better, really. And in that, surrender to God, God willing, I hope is my best service.